Alright, welcome betters. This is Mitch with Better Picks. Let's jump right into this. Last video I talked to you guys about for loops, and I promised that I would do some examples, so we're just going to do some examples. I've already got my Jupyter notebook up and running, so like last time I'm just going to type in for loop practice problems, and then Python it just types up. So let's just look at these. Let's do this. I mean, I haven't looked at these since making the video, but this one we already did. So see the last video to how to do this. It's very easy. Let's try doing this. I haven't done this before, so let's see. And again, with Python, there's going to be so many different solutions. So instead of just showing you it, let's talk about this and actually work through how this would happen, how to use for loops to do it. So, I mean, the first thing I would do is say, all right, let's see what happens if I do for I in range 1 to 5. So if I do print I want you to think about what this is going to print. Is this going to be correct? The answer is no, but what is it going to print? So if I do that, and again, right, it only prints up to 4 because it's base 0 and the second value is not included. So if we want it to print out to 5, we got to include that to 6 actually if we want the 5. And that's great, right? So we got 5, but that is not quite what it's asking for. It's asking for each step almost like print both of these things. And the way I'm thinking about it is probably going to be different than this solution, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to define we're just going to call a string. So again, remember strings. Remember if I type print 8 plus 5, it's not going to give me 13. It's going to say 8 plus 5, right? And so that's pretty close to what this looks like if we go back, right? It's like you're adding these. So it's almost like you got to take this number and convert it to a string and then kind of print it out. So let's see what happens if I were to do that. So again, and this is a simple way to do it, right? So if I just do type str, that stands for string, and if I hit 8, it's going to print out right with the quotes because it's just making this a string. So if I do this, nothing changes, right? It still looks exactly the same. The only difference is now it's technically a string. So if I do, what would I add here? What could I possibly add to make this say 1, then this say 1, 2, and then this say 1, 2, 3? It's kind of hard, so pause the video and think about it for a sec. I'm just going to do it here. So I'm going to define this as like, I'm going to call this thing numbers, and I'm just going to make it an empty string. So it's going to be nothing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say numbers equals numbers plus string I. And so think about this for a second. I'm going to take this out, and instead I'm going to print numbers and see what I'm doing here. So I'm basically saying take this empty string. So this command here is saying, and again, think of what I is. So it's going to start at I equals 1. So now it's going to say numbers equals to numbers, what it was originally, which is a blank, literally nothing. And we're going to add the string value of I, which is a 1. So we're going to say blank plus 1. So now it's literally, if I go up here and I type that in, so I do blank plus string 1, what's it going to print out? It's going to print out a 1. And when it goes through the second loop, it's not going to go all the way to the top here. It's going to just go straight to this loop. So now numbers, this is what numbers is as of the first thing. So now what it's going to do is it's going to go up to here and say, okay, I is now equal to 2. Numbers is now equal to this, which is a string version of 1. So now it's going to say numbers is now the string version of 1 plus the string of I, which I is now 2. So it's 1 plus the string version of 2. So if I were to do that, right, it's going to say 1, 2. And it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right, all the way up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I run this, what we should see is like pretty close to what the expression on this practice is doing. And then from there, you can just kind of think, okay, how would I add a space between these? And all you'd have to do is put this space. And then when you run it, right, now we have it. Again, This is just my way of doing it. Let's see what the solution is. It could be completely different. It could be exactly the same. There's always more than one answer. Last number equals 6 for a row. This is the same thing. So for I in range 1 to 6, which is what we have. So this last number they have defined here is 6. But then what they're doing is they're doing a nested for loop. You can do that if you want. This seems much more complicated. But let's go ahead and do another one. All right, we can do this, but not quite. We won't do this latter part. I'll let you guys do that at home. But basically, we're going to take this list. We're just going to copy paste it. We're going to take that. And basically, the question says, if it's divisible by 5, print it out. Right, so now we're going to also get into like what an if statement is. So we're going to say for, you can call anything. Let's just call it L. For L in list 1, let's just see what it make sure it's working. Print L. All right, so it prints out everything in order. So it goes boom, 12, 15, 32, blah, 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 blah. So now what we want to do is we say if it's divisible by 5, print it out. So the way to do this is there's this function in Python and a lot of coding languages that's called, I don't really know what it's called. Let me Google it. So it's called modulus. I don't know why they called it that. Someone else named it, not me. Basically what modulus does, if I take 15 and divide it and use the modulus and then 5, what it's going to give me is 0, which just means give me the remainder. So back to fun, long division, right? When you divide a number by another number, there's always a remainder. So if I did 15 divided by 2, what I'm going to get is 1, because 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. But technically, if you were to do long division as a kid, you would say it's 7 remainder 1, right? It's the same way here. So you have this remainder, and so basically what happens is if you take a number and divide it by something else, and it has a remainder equal to 0, that means it's divisible by it, right? So if I do 5, I'll get a 0. If I do 3, I'll get a 0. If I do 1, I'll get a 0. If I do, let's say, 17, it's going to say, right? Because since it's greater, it's going to say it's 1 with remainder 15. Or 0 with remainder 15. Don't ask me about that stuff. That is the way to tell. So if we did like 6, for example, it's going to say 3, right? Because 6 times 2 is 12, remainder 3. Hopefully that makes sense. So now what we're going to say is, again, we want things to be remainder equal to 0. So we want to say if L modulus 5 is equal to 0, and then also we're going to kind of get into this. Equals with the double equals is basically just like anytime you use if, or anytime you're asking the computer like, do these things equal each other, you use the double equals. So if that's the case, and then what we have to do is we have to tabulate this, because basically the for loop happens anything that's 1 tabbed over, and then the if statement happens anything that's 1 tabbed over. So for L, we're going to go through this whole thing, and then if L modulus 5 is equal to 0, print out L. All right, and so we hit enter, and we get that list. Not quite exactly in what is the answer here, but go ahead and try that one and see if you can get the 150 to stop, right? Go ahead and try that at home. Let's do one more example. Let's do this one. It's super easy. Display -10 to -1 using a for loop. I mean, there's so many ways to do this. What I would do is I would define a different variable. So I could say like x, capital X equals -10. And what I'll do is I'll say for I in range, and what am I going to? -10 to -1. So that's, you gotta go 11. We would say 0, 10. And we would say, print x. And then x equals x minus plus 1, right? Because negatives. So if I run that, it's going to print everything out. And if that doesn't make sense, think about it for a little bit. And let's go see what they did. They did the same kind of thing, except they actually did it easier. But I don't like thinking things backwards. I like thinking things forward. So that's my answer. But yeah, I mean, couldn't stress it more. Go and practice for loops. If statements get super important as well. go learn for loops as much as you can. They're super important, very valuable, and literally every time I do any sort of coding, I'm ending up using for loops. They're crucial, especially as we start getting more into feature engineering and data science, machine learning, those kind of things. All right, thank you guys. Hope this was helpful. Check out the website if you want the predictions early for NFL games. Check out the Patreon if you want a full data set. Give us an email, and best of luck with all your bets.